Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Art of Being a Woman. I'm your host, Courtney, and today we are discussing the art of healing the father wound. Before I ever started this podcast, and I would just visualize how it would go and what I would discuss, not knowing if I would actually do it, healing the father wound was definitely a topic I knew I would eventually discuss because it is something that I struggled with for most of my life. I think a lot of the topics I discuss are things that I've struggled with and had difficulty accepting was a part of my reality. I think there's moments in life when we are stuck on loops and we're stuck in patterns that we know deep down we want to outgrow, but we're not really sure how we're getting in our own way. It definitely took me getting into relationships with men specifically, and also female friendships, and just learning more about myself through other people. Every time I form a new relationship in my life, whether it's romantic or platonic, I always end up learning more about myself, and not in just a surface level way, but also I learn more about my subconscious. I believe our subconscious likes to show itself through the patterns in our life and the choices that we make over and over again without realizing the real reason behind it. And it's only when we get frustrated with our life and we think that we keep attracting the same circumstances or attracting the same types of people in our life that we really start to self-reflect and see if maybe we had a part to play in it. In order for me to discuss healing the father wound, I definitely have to be more vulnerable in this episode and share parts of myself that I've never really shared on a public platform before. I am a little bit nervous, but I am mostly excited because it is always liberating to be more authentically myself in a public space, and I'm always met with love and support. Thank God. Even if it's quiet support, whether it's a heart or just a listen, you being a listener means a lot to me. And so I'm ready. I'm ready to share more about myself, and I'm excited. And I hope that this episode helps you feel less alone in your experiences if you are someone that had to heal from the father wound. If you're still healing from it, if you don't even know where to begin, it doesn't matter. Just know that if you want to heal your father wound, you can and you will. It's just a matter of believing that it's possible and taking action, not the action that you've always been taking in your life, but new action. You have to be willing to look at the pain in your life that you've experienced in a new way, from a fresh perspective, because whenever we go through something heartbreaking or traumatizing, there's always a choice that we get to make about what it means to us. That choice is very powerful because it determines what we do with all that emotion. So if we've been really hurt by one of our parents, specifically our father, because that is the main focus for this episode, we can decide to use that pain as an opportunity to build our self-worth and our self-confidence on our own and not have it be reliant on the validation of a parent, or we can choose to use the pain and feel bad for ourselves and look at ourselves as victims. Personally, for me, when I was young and I was a teenager, I definitely saw it from the point of view of being a victim. Because as a teenager, it's really hard for you to zoom out and look at the big picture of things. At least that's how it was for me. I remember being young and knowing that my upbringing was different from many of my peers in terms of my relationship with my father, which I will get into shortly. And I always questioned it, like, why me? Why did I have to grow up in such challenging circumstances? Why was my start in life rough, or at least more challenging than others? I honestly felt like I was given a shitty hand in life and that I was just unlucky. But what I ended up realizing as I got older was that mentality was not helping me in any way, shape, or form. If anything, it was continuing to control the choices I made, especially in love and in the men that I dated, because it went unchecked for so long. And I never really got to the root of what this wound was doing to me behind the scenes. Now, to briefly cover my childhood, my parents had me when they were very young, and they were not married. Soon after they had me, they realized that it wasn't going to work out between them. Once my parents separated, my mom raised me for a few years on her own, and that was definitely challenging for me because for the first few years of my life, I was used to seeing both of my parents. But then as I got older, I felt like something that belonged to me was taken away from me. And I definitely had a hard time accepting that when I was young. I would say that I was definitely a sweet kid, but I held a lot of anger and sadness within me, and I didn't express it unless someone triggered me in certain ways or they would take something away from me. I would get triggered all over again and remember how frustrated I really was about my relationship with my father changing. So it was a little rough for me. It was rough for my little self. And I know that there are other people in this world that go through far worse childhoods, but that doesn't discredit what I went through, and it doesn't discredit what anyone goes through. So if you have your own story and it was intense for you, it was painful for you, but it wasn't the absolute worst and you've heard worse, it doesn't diminish what you went through. So don't allow anyone to convince you otherwise, and don't allow yourself to convince you otherwise. It just delays your healing when you put down your experiences. But back to the story. Once I realized that no matter how angry and sad I could possibly feel, the reality was that my father was no longer a main part of my life, I adapted and I adjusted. I definitely saw him from time to time, at least once a week. But then as time went on, it became less and less frequent. He wouldn't always show up to spend days with me when he told me he would. And I feel like that's a lot of people's stories when they talk about like divorced parents and the father says that they're going to pick them up and they don't. And it's funny because people really make memes out of painful experiences, and it helps. At least it helped for me because you realize you're not alone. None of us are really ever alone in the things that we go through, no matter how hard or challenging it is. And honestly, I find that to be very beautiful because when we are young, it can feel very isolating when the people in your immediate environment have not experienced what you've experienced. But yeah, I definitely spoke to him occasionally over the years as I grew up and became a teenager, but it was really rare, and I just accepted that he moved on. He moved on with his life. He got married. He had his own family. And eventually I just didn't see him anymore at all. And I didn't speak to him anymore at all. Even when I had a phone, I didn't really reach out to him. He didn't really reach out to me. And that's pretty much how it was. Now, when I was around 8 or 9, my mom got remarried to my stepfather, who I refer to as my father now. And that wasn't easy in the beginning, I'll be really honest, because even though my biological father was never really present ever since my parents separated, I still felt loyal to him, which I think is very normal. So I really resisted the idea of having a stepfather. So I definitely did not make it easy for him for most of my childhood years. And it was only when I got older and I started to express how I felt, especially about my childhood and how things went down, that I was really able to get to a place of understanding with my stepfather. Thankfully, he was able to open himself up to understanding my perspective and what life was like for me growing up, and we were able to repair our relationship. And the beautiful thing about our relationship now was that when we actually sat down to talk about our feelings, and it wasn't just me talking about my feelings, he definitely expressed how I shut him out growing up. I remember telling him that although I appreciate the conversation that we had, and I love that he was able to hear me out and we were able to really understand one another, I told him that it doesn't mean that things are going to change overnight. It doesn't mean that I'm going to feel like I didn't go through everything I went through growing up. He respected that. And because he gave me the space to gradually build trust with him, I did. And now we have an incredible relationship. I am very close with him. I can really tell him anything that's on my mind, whether he agrees with me or not. And he actually understands me, or at least he tries to understand me. And I feel very fortunate for my relationship with him. Now that I've covered the basics of my father wound, I definitely didn't get into more specific details and personal bits because I do like to maintain some sort of privacy over my personal life because it's sacred to me and it's personal, and maybe one day I'll share more and I'll care less. But it's a process, and I believe that what I shared is enough for this episode. Now, I'm going to discuss 4 steps that I wrote about on my Instagram account, and I also posted on Threads, which is my new favorite social media platform. I posted this topic specifically for Father's Day because it just passed this Sunday, so I just felt called to discuss this topic. It's the perfect timing. I feel like whenever Father's Day passes and whenever Mother's Day passes, people are always talking about their journey with their father, with their mother, and I wanted to join the conversation, add to the conversation. So here we are. The 4 steps in the written post are the following. 1. Recognize the patterns he inherited. 2. Understand why fathers must fall short. 3. Let go of the need to hold on. And 4. Rebuild a new relationship with strength. Let's begin. Number 1. Recognize the patterns he inherited. When I wrote this step, it was less about giving excuses for a father and the reasons why he fell short, because I am very passionate about people taking responsibility for their lives and the choices that they make. And there is no exception to that rule. That includes fathers as well. The actions that they take, whether they didn't know better, didn't have a role model, it doesn't excuse any of their behavior, and it doesn't excuse how it affected the people around them. The purpose of this step is really to focus on a deeper layer to this. A father, just like any other person, just like ourselves, grew up in an environment with parents that taught them all that they knew. Some of our parents were raised by people that went through such trauma and such pain that they never healed because they either didn't know how, didn't know that it was possible, or perhaps they just started families so young before they can even acknowledge that they were hurting inside, that they just ended up passing it on. And I believe that this is what happened to many of our parents. There's obviously layers to this, and it depends on different cultures and the generation, but there is definitely a collective understanding that most parents, if not all parents, have gone through hardship and they passed it on to their children. Now, why is this important to remember or to acknowledge and accept? It's important because if we don't acknowledge the patterns that he adopted from his parents and passed down onto us, then we will unconsciously end up passing it down again to our children, whether we currently have children now or we plan to have children one day. Now, there's also many women that decide that they don't want to have children, but perhaps you don't want to have children because you know that there's things that you need to deal with about your past and how you were raised, and perhaps it's a fear that you're going to pass down things that you went through that were passed down to you from your parents. And something that I'm very vocal about on this podcast is you never want to let fear control the decisions that you make in life. If you're going to decide to do something or not to do something, it should be because it excites you. Perhaps not having children excites you, then you know it's aligned. But if you're choosing not to have children because you have a fear that you're going to mess up, then you have to really reflect and challenge that belief. If we don't recognize and accept the patterns that our father passed down from his father, then we risk passing it down to our children, and we end up being attracted to men that embody the very same patterns we're trying to escape. So if we have a history of dating men that are inconsistent, or they're avoidant, or they're pathological liars, they're manipulative, the list can go on and on. It's not that all men are this way, not all men are manipulative, not all men are avoidant, so on and so forth. It's that we always end up attracting where we're at internally. So if we're not healed within ourselves, and we don't even realize that we're hurting from our own father wound, then what God and what the universe does is that He will bring people with this energy into our lives so that we can confront ourselves. And it's definitely painful to go through relationships where we experience the same wound again, whether it's abandonment or manipulation or narcissism, whatever it may be. But it's only happening so that we can become so aware of the pattern and make a very strong conscious decision to not entertain it going forward. We can only do that by facing it and healing it within ourselves. It's not enough to just say that we have a father wound. We have to figure out what type of father wound we have. So by uncovering the pattern of his behavior, we can really start to begin that process and therefore make better choices in the men that we choose to allow into our lives, and make better decisions for ourselves in general. Step 2. Understand why fathers must fall short. The interesting thing about fathers in general is that it doesn't matter if someone has had a textbook father wound or not, because eventually, whether your father was super supportive or not, they always end up disappointing their children in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not saying that to criticize them, but it's just a fact. They're human. And many times as children, we idolize our parents, especially if they were great parents. So when they make mistakes, it's almost as if our reality is being shattered and we realize, wait, I thought you were perfect. I thought you had all the answers. I thought that if I didn't know what I was doing with my life, you would just help me out and you would figure it out for me. So one of the beautiful things we gain is that we learn how to stand tall and stand strong on our own without relying on anyone. Now, for those of us that did grow up with a father wound, it definitely sucks in the beginning. You grow up, you don't have a choice but to stand tall and stand strong on your own and who you are. And when we feel like we don't have a choice, it can be really frustrating. But as adults, I believe it's a lot easier because we've already practiced making decisions for ourselves and standing up for ourselves our whole lives. And for those that have not experienced the father wound, they only go through this later in life when they realize that they can't rely on a man constantly to make the right decisions for them. This step is universal. It's not even just for women, it's for men too. When a father is raising his son, the son has to also get to a point where he realizes that he cannot rely on his father for survival. Because how will you ever be able to prove to yourself that you're capable of not just surviving, but achieving any sort of success on your own? The validation and the confidence and the self-assuredness, it needs to all come from within. That is exactly why fathers must fall short. It forces each and every one of us to really take control of our lives and to take matters into our own hands and prove to ourselves that we are fully capable of achieving greatness and whatever it is we want to achieve on our own. Step 3, let go of the need to hold on. This was a hard one for me. I'm not gonna lie. I think I fluctuated in my life between being very conscious of the fact that I had a hard time letting go of my biological father, and then fluctuating into someone that pretended that she didn't care and that I didn't need my father because I don't want to be told what to do anyways. I'd rather just live my life being unchecked, because I know that the friends that I've had that had much healthier relationships with their fathers, they cared what their father thought of them, and they would avoid upsetting him, and he was more strict, and I just didn't grow up with that as much because I did not have my father around. So I definitely maximized his absence in that way from time to time. But then there were also moments of yearning for a relationship that I never had and that I really wanted. But the thing is, if we allow ourselves to dwell too long in the what ifs, and even dwell at all in the what ifs, especially if it's in regards to the past, something we can't go back to and something we can't change, we're going to attract similar men that have that same pattern, so that we can once and for all decide to stop looking backwards and start moving forwards. So letting go is really not even about giving up on your father. You're letting go of the need for him to be someone that he's not. And by doing this, you set yourself free. You set yourself free from the wound, from the expectation that things might change. When we don't let go, it's almost as if we keep putting a band-aid over a wound and then we keep taking off the band-aid. So it keeps getting infected again. We have to make a decision. Are we really trying to heal this wound and move on and let it fully heal? Or are we going to fixate on it so much and keep it alive? Sometimes we keep it alive because it's proof that we went through something challenging, but going through challenging things doesn't really hold value until we do something positive with what we've been through. I don't believe that there's any coincidences in life. So going through anything that is incredibly painful and traumatic and heartbreaking can be alchemized, which means the energy can be transformed into literal power. Power over yourself, power to make a great change in the world. If you research the stories and the upbringings of so many successful people in this world, they all have had a difficult childhood. All of them. But they never allowed it to be their focus. They used their pain to motivate them so that they would never end up where they started. So if you're really looking to heal your father wound, consider that, because the choice is yours. One more thing I want to touch on before we move on to step 4 is that we can think that we moved on, but a good way to tell that we haven't fully moved on, well, actually, there's a few ways to tell that we haven't moved on. One is assuming that all men are bad or negative or cheaters. That's something that personally I've outgrown for a while. I believe that our beliefs create our reality, so we have to be very careful with what we're willing to believe. I know that social media really pushes a lot of content on women speaking about negative experiences with men and then men sharing negative experiences with women. But honestly, I think, unfortunately, negativity gets pushed out a lot more than positivity on social media. It just gets the most reactions from people, which honestly shows the current state of our world. Many people are addicted to their pain and their suffering, but it's all a process. I think we're all addicted to our pain and suffering until we get sick and tired of it and we realize that we don't want to live like this anymore and we want better for ourselves. So we decide to seek better and do better. Another example of how we know that we have not fully let go of our father wound, which can also be referred to as healing our masculine energy, is when we're hyper independent and we don't like to accept help from other people. This is something that I am still working on. I feel like I've gotten better with it, but I definitely still have work to do. This can be as simple as accepting help when someone offers to lighten your load, whether you have a lot of responsibilities on your plate and it's not that you went out of your way to ask someone to help you. They offered, and even then you just feel uncomfortable because you know you can do it yourself and it's just better when you do it. That's just a sign that you haven't allowed yourself to give up the need to be your own father and handle everything. As women, we don't need to handle everything. we're just going to burn ourselves out. Another way we become hyper independent is that we pretend that we don't need anything from anybody. We don't need a man, we don't need to settle down. I truly believe that men and women need each other, and I think it just takes some growing up to really admit that. We will never grow as a person if we're living alone in isolation, because it's very easy to be by yourself because no one challenges you. Being hyper independent and convincing ourselves that needing nothing is the safest way to live is the quickest way to experience burnout as a woman. Work on getting to the root of your father wound. Learn to fully let it go, and not in the way of forgetting what happened. You don't have to forget what happened, but you have to forgive him so that you can set yourself free. There was a post that I saw when I was young, and it was a screenshot of a page, so I'm not sure what the book is, but I will read to you what it said because it was really profound. It says, "Forgive anyone who has caused you pain or harm. Keep in mind that forgiving is not for others, it is for you. Forgiving is not forgetting, it is remembering without anger. It frees up your power, heals your body, mind, and spirit. Forgiveness opens up a pathway to a new place of peace where you can persist despite what has happened to you." All those years, I thought that if I were to forgive, then it meant that I was excusing the actions of my father, dismissing my hurt feelings and the pain that I went through. But it's really not the case at all. It's a matter of validating yourself, accepting that what happened already. We can't change it, no matter how hard we try, and choosing to let it go so that we have more room in our heart for things that light us up and make us feel loved and not broken and hurt. It's truly how we end the cycle for good. Step 4, rebuild a new relationship with strength. When we grow up feeling unprotected, we often try to become the protector ourselves. We'll overcorrect things that we think are going wrong. We try to lead everybody and everything, and we have a hard time trusting others. But when we get into this unhealed masculine energy, we start acting from the father wound, and we start acting like all the patterns that he passed down to us that we're trying to overcome. So it might not be with overcorrecting for you or trying to lead everything and everyone, but perhaps you're avoidant. Perhaps you shut down emotionally when things get tough. Perhaps you ghost people to avoid confronting difficult emotions and situations. This is definitely something that I had to come to terms with myself, and I'm still working on it for sure. But it definitely gets easier. I feel like the hardest part is acceptance, because you have to call yourself out on your own bullshit, frankly, and be really honest with yourself on where you might be repeating the patterns that you disliked that your father passed down to you. And from that place, you can accept it without judgment. It's neutral. When we're children, life is happening to us. And then once we become adults, we start to shape our reality based on our thoughts and our actions. So we must be really aware and intentional with the way that we choose to show up in life so that we don't end up repeating the wound again, because we were never meant to go through what we went through to just pass it on. If we went through something hard and painful, it's because our soul fully understood that it could rise above it and overcome it and transmute it and alchemize it. Not that it would be easy, but that it would be possible. And it's never too late. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can be 100 years old. What matters is that you get honest with yourself. And from that place, your life will really take off, because it means we're truly growing and evolving. And that's the point of life. We are all here to truly grow and evolve and become better people, and hopefully leave the world a better place than we found it. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode. I definitely loved sharing a more vulnerable side to myself. I'm sure that I am on a little high of facing my fears right now, and as I edit this episode, I will think to myself, wow, did I really just share that with the world? But I'm proud of myself. The challenges that we go through in life don't need to be a secret. especially if they can help someone else, and especially if we want to prove to ourselves how much we've healed. I think that's definitely one of my motivations behind sharing this episode. I not only want to prove to myself that I've healed my father wound, but I also want to prove to the world that it's possible. If you like this episode, I would love to hear your thoughts. Also, share this episode with a friend, a family member, anyone and everyone that you think would benefit from this. I love you all. I hope you have a great week. Until next time, bye for now.